Descartes said, I think, therefore I am.
Yep, Descartes.
I would say I imagine, therefore I am.
Today I'm joined by Mr. Galey, a teacher and former school minister who spent years guiding students through courses on world religions, Buddhism, and the philosophy of nature and meaning. He actually created the original Nature and Meaning course here, weaving together science and religious philosophy to ask how physics, biology, and spirituality all speak to our search for truth. He brings that same curiosity and depth to our conversation today about what makes us human. In this episode, we're asking, what makes a human human? Is it our biology, our spirit, or, as Mr. Galey suggests, our imagination? Together, we'll explore how imagination fuels both science and spirituality, and what that reveals about who we are.
Drum roll if you're ready. What makes a human human?
Yeah, the simplified scientific explanation is, it's just biology, right? And we have different biology than other animals. And so we name it human, even though our DNA, of course, is 98.5% the same as apes or something, Obviously, from a religious philosophical point of view, what makes us human sort of transcends just the biological. So it's interesting because recently I've been reading, I'm still reading, a book by a Buddhist monk, which is entitled The World Could Be Otherwise, The Bodhisattva Path and Imagination. And it's really triggered in me a lot of thought about imagination, the concept of imagination. And I would argue right now, tentatively anyway, that it's our power of imagination is one of the things that makes us human. Was it John Locke, or I forget, one of the great philosophers, or Descartes maybe, said, I think, therefore I am?
Yep, Descartes.
I would say I imagine, therefore I am, in terms of I am human. Because I think other animals, even the animals closest to us in intelligence, they may have a form of imagination which relates maybe to need to problem solve in certain situations. But I don't think that they have the capacity to imagine worlds beyond our own. And by that I don't mean solar systems, realms of being beyond our own. A level of imagination that humans have. And of course, that's particularly been the area of religious philosophy, thinking of realms of being beyond just this, material physical realm we live in and day out. So that's sort of where I am right now in my philosophical journey.
I like that a lot, the idea of something that transcends this world in a way. Yeah, go ahead.
And I would just add, I would argue that, going back to, a few minutes ago talking about the Nature and Meaning course, I would argue that it's the imagination is an intersection between science and religion, or science and spirituality, because think of the great strides in science, what we've learned. Like Einstein's a perfect example. It was his imagination led him to develop the theories of general and special relativity. And, we call it thinking outside the box, is another way I think of describing imagination. But I think it's been imagination that has driven scientific endeavor as well as spiritual endeavor.
I think that's a really good point, actually, and I think often we neglect to realize how important imagination plays a role in scientific discovery. And I was just thinking a lot of the more theoretical stuff in physics nowadays, like with quantum and all of that, you got to have some imagination.
Perfect example. Yeah. And look at where it's leading. Some very reputable physicists are seriously entertain the idea of multiverse. Now that takes imagination.
Right. Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. And the quantum theory is a perfect example of how, in order to get us where we are in terms of quantum theory, there had to be a lot of imagination on the part of a lot of really brilliant people. And even in developing, I would argue, the mathematics necessary. Because Einstein conceptually had these ideas, but he didn't have the math to really prove them, back it up. So I think even the development of the mathematical constructs that have led us to be able to get to where we are anyway, understanding quantum reality, even the development of those mathematical constructs, I think, took tremendous imagination. And I think really imagination is just, if you think about our human lives, you think about anytime we aspire to something. You're getting a C in a class, you aspire to getting an A. To get from the C to the A takes imagination. What can I imagine that I need to do to get from here to there?
Right.
Imagination is so central to our human beingness.
I think the hard thing is, I think that's definitely something special and something that has driven many aspects that we don't see in other animals. I think the study of history is, in many ways, imagining into the past, perhaps, and also regarding maybe economics, finance, you kind of have to, the stock market, you kind of have to think about projecting into the future, and that's imagination. I guess the hard bit is, do non-human animals, do they have the capacity to imagine? It's hard to...
Well, the problem with that is, of course, how do you measure it?
Right.
I am astounded by what we learn more and more about the nature of animals and what they have the capacity of doing, mentally in particular, that there's a lot closer, and emotionally in terms of feelings. And it's so you start, like many endeavors, with certain presuppositions. And certainly from my point of view, I've always had the presupposition that there is something qualitatively different in the human being than even our closest animal relatives. That it's not just DNA related. And as I said earlier, right now in my philosophical journey, I'm thinking of that in terms of imagination. But what we can really say about the animal kingdom in terms of imagination, well, I don't think we can say much.
Yeah,
it's hard. So for me, as I said a little earlier, I don't see any evidence, and I don't even know how you would get evidence if it was there to be seen. I don't know how you would ascertain it. Any evidence of animals, our closest relatives, being able to imagine, again, realms of being beyond the physical realm. You think of the dolphin living in the ocean. Can they imagine a realm of being that transcends death? Can they even imagine a realm of being living on dry land? So our capacity to do that, and to aspire to even in our physical existence, right? Even in our current physical bodies that we're living our lives in, we aspire to do something greater. We aspire to be a better person. We aspire to change our lives if this life isn't working. Not just in the sense of self-preservation. Like in the animal kingdom.
Yeah.
Oh, this is threatening me. I got to figure out a way to get out of this. Or what? Not just in the sense of self-preservation, but aspiring to a greater understanding of who I am. A greater moral character or that kind of thing. I don't see the animal kingdom having that capacity. That doesn't make them less valuable. I think if anything we've learned, or I'm not sure we've really learned it fully yet, but, is that the value of non-human life is every bit as valuable as human life in terms of their right to happiness and their right to being and not having particularly human species wipe them out. And that, unfortunately, is another, that's the negative byproduct of imagination, is that we've also imagined, which the animal kingdom hasn't done, all sorts of ways to destroy life.
Right.
So that's the dark side.
Of imagination, yeah. It's two-sided.
Yeah, always. Yeah.
I have a question in regards to imagination. If what makes a human human is their imagination, what happens if a human loses that ability?
That's a great question. Like through maybe mental trauma.
Right. Or let's say like a brain injury.
Brain injury, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
That's a great question. So that gets to the level of, is there a spiritual essence inside us that even if we, through, let's say, traumatic brain injury, lose our ability to think normally or even imagine, does that, the basic question, I guess, would be, are we no longer really human? Now we're part of the animal kingdom. And I would say no, because certainly as someone who's been focused on religious philosophy, all my life, I certainly believe, it's not something I think that can be really proven, but I certainly believe one of the presuppositions I start my journey with is that there is a non-physical essence. I think that to some extent, the imagination we're talking about is related to that. So even if we suffer traumatic brain injury and are unable to function mentally normally, there's still some essence to us that transcends the animal kingdom. Let's say if someone is born mentally limited,
right,
as opposed to having had the capacity but through a trauma loses it, does that make a difference? That's
another question.
It is. I don't think it does, but that's a really tough question. So I guess you could think in terms of the concept of potential, right? As
like a capacity to do.
Yeah, and honestly, with people who are either born with serious mental limitations or suffer traumatic brain injury, we don't really know whether or not the capacity for imagination is still there, but that it's just not able to be expressed. Right? So that's a question. If it's there, but it may not be able to be expressed.
Yeah, then that would really mean, I think, the idea of the capacity.
Correct.
To imagine. That would be something.
The capacity, the potential.
The potential. And possibly it's just blocked off in a way. It needs activation.
Yeah.
Do you think this essence that you're talking about that makes us human, maybe the idea of capacity is, since every human, let's just suppose that even the people who are born with maybe like a mental disability, they have the capacity. Just for the purpose of this, let's suppose they do have the capacity. Then do you think that capacity is something that's inherent, like you're born with it, and that's immediately what makes you human?
I think that's a great question. I think at some point so I don't think a fetus of, say, 20 weeks old has it.
Right.
But by the time birth happens, probably. But I think in some mysterious way, even though I don't think it's just limited to our physical brain, even though I don't think it's limited to the growth of our physical brain, I think there's something a bit more than that. I think it is related. So this is where the sort of the capacity, the potential, the spiritual, et cetera, works in harmony with the physical. As the physical brain develops, these capacities are enhanced. But I don't think it's just the result of the physical development. Yeah, our brains aren't the largest brains, but they're the most complex. Right?
Our brains aren't the largest?
No, our brains are not the largest brains in the animal kingdom, but they're the most complex because of how our brains are developed with all the folds. There are so many folds, so that in our brain that's this big, the capacity for electronic communication in the brain, all that is so much greater than even the brain of the elephant that's bigger.
Wow.
So that's all those folds in our brains, so that capacity, when does it really kick in? I don't know. That's an age-old question. And those who, are materialists, they're often labeled, which essentially all we are is our physical being,
right,
would argue, well, you can't show that at any point in time some magic thing happens to the brain and all of a sudden we have imagination. They would say that's just part of the normal brain development. It's all physical. It's all a physical result. I don't buy that, but I guess I'd have to say that's, a presuppositional belief that I come to my philosophy with. And that's true. No matter what your endeavor is, you're coming with a certain set of, presuppositions.
Right, definitely.
If you're open to having those challenged, that's good, right? That's growth. And so that's where I am. And I'm not arguing that, some divine being zaps us with this spirit or something. It's, I think my study of religion and my study of world religions in particular has led me to, the conclusion with so many different expressions, religious expressions that developed in different areas, all concluding that there is a realm of being that transcends the physical realm, and that through our imagination we can access that, has led me to conclude that that's a pretty sound idea. Improvable, perhaps. Some other religious people would say, oh no, it's provable, but I'm not sure. But it seems likely. And again, people would argue that we've developed that idea because of our immense fear of death.
Why would they argue that it developed?
Because we wanted, our immense
like
fear.
a part that will
a part that will perpetuate. Exactly, Audrey. Right. So in order to lessen that fear, we imagine some part of it that continues on. But I think it's more than that. I don't think it's just I don't think it's just something we made up because we're afraid. I think all animals are afraid of death.
Yeah.
But I don't think the dolphin or the ape have developed because again, back to the capacity of imagination, have developed systems of belief that where they imagine a life after their death in some form or another. And there are a lot of different forms that are proposed in different religious systems, but the theme that some part of us continues to exist is universal.
Yeah, I was reading a few different articles, and it was the idea of like there's two competing schools of thought. One is like the materialism that you mentioned, and the other, I forget the name, but it was something like dualism or something, which is exactly like you've described, the idea of us having a material body here, but also a transcendental aspect.
Yeah, classic dualism sort of proposes that they're two completely separate kind of entities. I'm not sure if I agree with that. I think the physical and the, for a lack of a better word, spiritual, are far more integrated. I think our physical being affects how we think about how we imagine life beyond the physical, our physical experience. But I don't think it dictates it. See, that's the difference. I think it influences it, but I don't think it dictates it. Some people will argue, no, we're just, DNA is fate. DNA is our fate. But I don't buy that.
I think like maybe this is sort of different from what you mean by dictate, but I think that the spiritual cannot live without the physical. The physical can live without the spiritual, but it would be maybe what would remove the human experience from it, because you would live a very, for lack of a better word, material life without
where everything is just
what it is
related to physical needs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I also think maybe a counter argument to the criticism that people who think there is a spiritual aspect is only out of fear for death is that humans are constantly seeking meaning in everything they do.
Right.
And, we ask, like, what is the meaning of life?
Yep.
And I don't think, perhaps giraffes and other animals do that as well, but...
That's a perfect example. I've used that argument many, many times. Man's search for meaning is...
That's fundamentally a spirit.
Yeah, it is. That's not just, in my opinion, the result of the fact that we have more complex brains, more complex physical structure. I think it's beyond that.
And I think even if you do argue it is the result of a more complex brain, you have to acknowledge that a brain, as it grows more complex, it has directions to be more quote-unquote complex in. Like, it could be, let's see the most efficient way to increase our evolutionary chances of survival and biology. I think a brain can get more complex and it can be focusing on evolutionary aspects, but our brain chooses to go in the direction that's what is the meaning of life, and these things that actually don't affect our day-to-day physical survival and probably doesn't productively make us live longer lives or anything like that. But I think it's the direction that the brain chose to go seems to suggest something that is not purely biological.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And I would argue that, in a sense, yes, it doesn't, that development that you're talking about doesn't necessarily help us survive. But I kind of argue that it does, in the sense of without that seeking, with that journey is so fundamental to the meaning of our lives that without that, we're not less human, but we're certainly
not getting the full.
Yeah. We're not experiencing life as fully as we might.
Yeah.
And I think that, honestly, getting into a different realm, because, for 15 years here at the Academy, I was in the counseling department. I think that is perhaps, you could argue, one of the root causes of mental illness. That we're not, if we lose the drive to aspire to something else, if we lose the drive to think about meaning and pursue the questions of meaning of life, that leads to mental illness. Not necessarily severe mental illness, but certainly depression, anxiety, perhaps. That's a theory of mine. I mean, other people have it. I didn't make that up. That's stuff that is a result of stuff I read a long time ago. But I mean, I think there's something to be said about that.
Yeah.
So we to be fully human is to engage that imagination, that aspiration, that journey toward potential, that journey to discover meaning is so built in. And I agree, I don't think it's just biological. That when we don't do that, for whatever reason, we work too much, right? Or whatever the reason is, we develop what we would classify as mental illness, anxiety, like I said, anxiety, depression.
I think mental illness is super, super interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's the idea that you're surviving, but you're not. It's like you're surviving, but are you really living?
Yeah.
And it's like
the difference between surviving and thriving.
Exactly. It's like all your material or like physical bodily needs are met, and yet how can somebody, that's like actively going against evolution at that point. You're like, all your bodily needs are met, and yet you don't have the will to survive. Like the will to survive, that's super interesting. I think in the animal kingdom, and maybe perhaps while we were still hunter-gatherers, there was no such thing as like a will to survive. It was just, if you can
instinct.
survive, right? Like,
yeah.
What the problem is, if I can survive, it's not whether I want to. Like, obviously I want to, that's a given.
Yeah.
But now because of these things like mental illness, I think it talks deeper definitely to like something funny that can't just be biological, because right, like we're actively going against biological means. And I think a further direction of research that I definitely want to look at is if mental illness exists in like non-human animals. That would be really interesting.
Yeah, I think there's been some research. I can't really direct you toward any, but I think there's been some research that suggests that animals feel anxiety. But is that the anxiety of their life being threatened?
Right,
right.
exactly,
The squirrel's being chased by the dog is feeling anxiety. Well, of course it is, because it doesn't want to die, right? Is it more than that? I don't know, but I think there is some research going on that sort of suggests that
there could be.
Yeah, but again, maybe there's an anxiety that naturally comes from the need to survive. I mean, right? Our brains developed to make instantaneous decisions to help us survive. We're walking through the jungle, we hear a sound that triggers a certain anxiety that sound's going to hurt us. Immediately, we have no clue. It might be just a bird flitting, or it might be a tiger. But the brain developed for our survival to sort of make that instant...
fight, flight, or...
Yeah, exactly, to protect. You could say, well, that's anxiety, but that's not the same type, right? Yeah. In my opinion, that's not the same.
I think that's being anxious, but not anxiety.
Yeah, right. And of course, we do know. I mean, we've known for decades now that certain types of depression and levels of depression are chemically related, right, to the brain, chemicals in the brain. But there's it's not necessarily just that.
Yeah.
Which is why research has suggested for a long time that treatment for major depression isn't just drugs, which help with the chemicals, but also therapy.
Yeah.
Right? Because so that suggests that if it was just the drugs, you took the drugs, boom. But it doesn't work.
Right,
doesn't work that way. It doesn't work best that way.
I think often as well, like the drugs can give you a short-term like happiness or a boost, but then it long-term to really fundamentally fix the issue is therapy, or it's like you have to understand and talk.
You have to understand. You have to sort of learn how to. You have to rethink.
Right. It's not just like
You have to learn how to rethink your experiences and how you react to your life's experiences.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of how it's not all biological.
Yeah.
And another thing in regards to like mental illnesses found in non-human animals, the other day I was kind of like, something interesting just I was searching up was if non-human animals ever have anorexia, like...
Interesting.
Right, and that's also, I think, the idea of going against your evolution.
Yeah,
because why would any animal actively... And so immediately, like, the answers I was getting was yes, but then, like, looking a little deeper, I think it was Austin what you said about, like, the fight, flight, or freeze kind of anxious. It was like anorexia if they were like not feeling well or like sick, and that's when they don't. But I think that is more of a biological response and not like an active, like I don't want to. Right. So I think, certainly maybe, and correct me or offer any kind of criticism against this, but I think maybe an idea that we're getting at is that humans are the only species that actively goes against their evolution or their biology.
Interesting that we can counter the
instinctual.
We can counter our drive to survive.
Right.
Whereas maybe other animals can't.
Yeah.
And so maybe that goes back to that idea of even our imagination has a dark side to it. We build weapons to kill other human beings. We pollute and kill animals, and we harm ourselves, which that certainly does seem counter to our evolutionary drive to survive.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, animals will do that. Like, if an animal is stuck in a situation and it might gnaw its paw off to, if its paw is stuck and an animal is hunting it or something, it might gnaw its paw off in order to get free. Mm-hmm. But that's a drive to survive.
Right. So I also think the idea of imagination, maybe it's not necessarily actively going against evolution, but it's more like the ability to think about things that are beyond the mere aim to survive.
Yeah. That certainly seems to be the case. Yeah, it certainly seems to be the case. And maybe certain mental illnesses maybe indicate that. The complexity of the human being, the human psyche, is so profound.
Yes.
That to me it just doesn't. It doesn't seem to me that it was simply the result of evolutionary development. Now, I also am hesitant to say that there was some supreme being or something that decided to infuse us with a spirit or something.
That's all for part 1 of my conversation with Mr. Galey. We dug into imagination as the thing that makes us human, its power, its risks, and why it might matter even more than biology. In part 2, we'll keep going into some really big territory, like what it means to search for meaning and how imagination connects to mental health. So make sure to tune back in. Thanks for listening to Squirrel, and I'll see you next time.